Hello everyone. I'm delighted to welcome Jahnavi Phalkey, Founding Director of Science Gallery Bengaluru, which will open to the public in 2021. Jahnavi is a historian of science and a filmmaker. She is the author of Atomic State, Big Science in 20th Century, India, and director-producer of the documentary Cyclotron. For those of you not familiar with the Science Gallery is the world's first university-linked network dedicated to public engagement with science and art, with galleries in Dublin, London, Melbourne, Venice, Detroit, and Rotterdam. Science Gallery Bengaluru is the gallery in Asia with the mandate to deliver a global mission, drawing on the intellectual capital of three India's leading research institutions, Indian Institute of Science, National Center for Biological Science, and Srishti Institute of Art, Design and Technology. In this talk, Jahnavi will introduce the form and structure of the new institution and explore with us the ideas that inform the shape of Science Gallery Bengaluru through her journey to answer to one question, which is, what does it mean to go beyond science communication towards engagement with science? So, over to you.
Thank you. Am I audible? Excellent. So it's hard enough to wake up everybody at the end of the day, and I think it's going to be harder, especially after you've been asked to, enter into deep state relaxation. I'll try my best. Thank you for the kind introduction, Sarah. What I'll do is, I'll try and wake you up, not with my words, but I'll show you a little film, after which I'll present the gallery to you. It's about 4 minutes long.
So Science Gallery is a space where art and science collide.
A hub for art science professionals to come together to explore art and science topics.
So the nature of our programming is experimental. We do events, we do exhibitions, we do whole seasons of programming. We don't often know what the outcome will be when we start on a project, and that's the beauty of what we do.
The Artbite exhibition is all about getting inside an animal's mouth and being able to really picture yourself being eaten by a variety of animals.
So the project is called The Spit Crystal, and Ines, which is the artist, she approached us because she had an idea of crystallizing spit.
And I was brought in because I'm a crystallographer and I should know about crystals. And I couldn't understand what this was about, this crystallizing spit. Remarkably, after many attempts at growing crystals, we did actually manage to get crystals to grow out of salivary fluid.
So the project is called A Cleft in Time, and the aim of the project is to explore the narratives of young people with cleft lip and palate. So the public are given the opportunity to cast their own hard palate using a silicone putty on an impression tray. They can listen to audio clips from young people who have cleft, talking about their experiences at school and also how they would like to teach other people who don't understand much about cleft as yet.
Researchers who get involved with the Science Gallery programme walk away inspired. So this idea of creative collaboration is something that we hope enriches their own perspective on their research. In some cases it's led to new research directions and think about a topic in a completely new way.
I think Maldi's been a very good opportunity to look at how you can engage different audiences. So in particular, Maldi's has this quite young teen base that it's trying to attract, and that's not really a group of people that I usually interact with.
It's a very good experience for any scientist and for young scientists especially to be able to talk about their work. So any opportunity that projects such as this provide are very, very valuable. I think if you can't explain in a few words what it is that you're doing, then you probably shouldn't be doing it.
There are people that they're not scientists and they are really interested on working with you and on what you do. And I was always afraid and scared to say, you know, I'm doing biophysics, I'm doing crystallography, because I feel like people wouldn't understand what I'm doing. But through art, I think it's much easier to explain and it's more engaging.
Something that gave me great pleasure was watching Ines, who had picked up the terminology from us about X-ray crystallography and structural biology, explaining to people what exactly we were doing, and then I was trying to explain what she had been doing. The next question will be, you don't do this every day, do you? So what do you actually do? Well, actually, I use X-ray crystallography, this same technique that we've been using to look at these crystals, only we do it on allergens and antibodies involved in allergy and asthma, and then you start talking about that.
Both science and art are trying to reflect on the world in different ways, and when you bring them together, that exploration and reflection on the world becomes much deeper and much more interesting.
I think working quite intensely in two different fields brings with it a lot of challenges, but also brings unusual opportunities, and for me it's added a lot of depth to my area of interest. And it means that I really enjoy coming to work if it involves a collaboration between different professionals.
In a second, yeah? So are we up? Is this on? Can you see? Yes, you can see. No, you can't see. Yes, you can. No, you can't. Okay. Why don't I start while it begins? Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. So, given that the film was from Science Gallery London, I guess, and Sarah's introduction should have given you some context as to we are a part of a larger network of galleries based in lots of places. So these are our locations. You can hear me, right? Yeah. So the key thing about Science Galleries is that we are a university-based institution or unit or center, you might call it in different ways, which are deeply embedded in research, teaching, and outreach ambitions of a university. Now, so we are in, just to kind of give names to these locations, Dublin, where the project began in 2011. Sorry, it was 10 years old in 2011 or something like that. And then we have London, Melbourne, Venice, Detroit, Rotterdam. So we are 7 of us right now. And they're all, so they are at Trinity College Dublin, King's College London, University of Melbourne, Michigan State University, Ca' Foscari in Venice, and Erasmus University in Rotterdam. Now, obviously in Bangalore we had to do things differently. So in Bangalore, we are the only independent gallery in the network, but we serve the same mandate, which is to bring this sense of engagement to the target age group, which is 15 to 25-year-olds. And our founding partner is the Government of Karnataka, and as is evident to many of you, I'm guessing, are working with state or public institutions for longevity, for the kind of support that is required for any long-term change, long-term sort of change in perceptions, in attitudes, or to bringing about long-term learning and collaboration. State support is almost essential, if not critical, and therefore I think it's actually quite wonderful that we have the support of the Government of Karnataka. The Indian Institute of Science is our lead academic partner, and we have National Center for Biological Sciences and Srishti also as our partners, with significant commitment from them in terms of space, people, experts, etc. So I'll come to the content in a second. So in a sense, what I want us to notice here is that the key institutions that we are involved with keep the idea of the university-linked unit in place. The taglines that the universities, this university-linked network uses are two. One is, so Science Gallery is supposed to be a place where art and science collide, or art and science meet, if you want to use it that way. And the other one is connect, participate, and surprise. Now all of these, so effectively the idea is to connect people to each other, to bring them together in participation, and hopefully it will lead to some surprising outcomes, good or bad, right? Because as you will all know, it's a different journey when you don't know what the outcomes are likely to be, and this is one such project where we don't know the outcomes necessarily, what the outcomes necessarily are when we actually begin on any project. So our independence from being tied very closely to a single university's strategy, so to speak, has allowed us to develop our own motto. So currently we are working with this, science, culture, and experiment. And culture, because it goes beyond just the sort of a narrow idea of art, and therefore allows us to bring in the humanities and other aspects of creative human activity. And experiment, because this should be an experiment. It's an experiment not only, it's an experiment in itself as an institution, because as we are all aware, it's far more difficult in our higher education system for people from the sciences and the humanities and art to be collaborating or working together on anything at all. In fact, at sort of age 17, once people leave these institutions, it's almost unimaginable that they will have learning spaces together, right? Our universities often, or our educations of higher learning often work in silos, very, very seriously, strictly defined and separated silos, much more so than anywhere else, right? And I mean sort of, by anywhere else, I usually mean Europe and North America. So it's an experiment. So this institution itself is an experiment. It's an experiment to bring science and art and cultural activity together. And it is also, in a sense, science's experiment with culture, right? So there's a play there which will allow us to capture the kind of things we want to do when locating this, institution now in Bangalore and India, because we will remain the only gallery in India. At the moment, we are the only gallery in Asia. Our goal is to have 12 galleries in the world by 2023, at which point we stop. And a dozen is kind of enough, is the decision the network has taken. I'm not complaining. And so our goals is public engagement. And I understand that you've been hearing a lot about public engagement so far. My apologies for not being around before this, but I'll try to sort of say some things, some of which you might have already heard, and hopefully contribute more to that. So I think what the public spaces for science that most of us are used to, in India but also elsewhere, are museums, so science museums and science centers. In India, mostly what we see are science centers. Very rarely do we, in fact, actually, we don't really have a proper historical collections-based museum that is comparable, say, to the Smithsonian or the Science Museum in London or the Deutsches Museum in Munich, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A place where, say, for example, a young person can go and see, this is C.V. Raman's spectrograph, this is J.C. Bose's frescograph, or this is the model that G.N. Ramachandran built, or something of that kind, right? So in a sense, our history or our narrative or our telling of the story of how science in India, or how the enterprise of science in India has unfolded, is not really there in the public domain for anybody to explore on their own, right? So there aren't such public spaces. So that's one thing. So what we have mainly, I think, are science centers, which are based on a wonderful model that was developed at the Exploratorium in the 1970s by Frank Oppenheimer. And just to give you an anecdote, and my contribution after the film to wake you up, is that the Exploratorium was born because of us, like India, in a sense. Well, actually, partly the Americans and partly us, or we have a contribution to it, and this is the manner in which we made the contribution. So Frank Oppenheimer was under trial in the McCarthy era, which is in the 1950s and mid-50s and up until early 1960s, for having left-leaning ideas, right? So his brother was also, J. Robert Oppenheimer was also called to the House of Un-American Activities, as was his brother, Frank Oppenheimer, who was a cosmic ray physicist. And he realized this was happening. So this was happening to him and Bernard Peters, two American cosmic ray physicists, both of whom then wrote applications to come to India. This is a detour from my story about the gallery, but I'm waking you up. And Bernard Peters ended up in India. Now, Bernard Peters was someone who actually had, at one point, escaped a concentration camp in Dachau and then ended up in California and then in India. So he was safely at TIFR and worked there for about 10 years before he moved to Denmark. But the story of Frank Oppenheimer is a more interesting one. And that's why the Exploratorium. Frank Oppenheimer was made an offer by Homi Jahangir Bhabha to come to TIFR and join Bernard Peters and him to do cosmic ray physics. And the last traces of that story that I saw in the archive was a 2-line letter to Bhabha written by Frank Oppenheimer saying, they've denied me my passport. So he couldn't travel, he couldn't come to India, and as a result of which he stayed back in California and established the Exploratorium. And the Exploratorium cookbooks, so for those of us who are interested, the Exploratorium cookbooks, there are 3 massive cookbooks, which are basically experiments made for public interaction, have been used the world over since the 1970s to establish science centers where people can do hands-on things, right? So those are the things we see today in our science centers. So the National Council of Science Museums in India has, since the 70s and 80s, used those cookbooks extensively. They're called cookbooks. I mean, this is not a term that I'm giving them. And so that was the last, in many ways, that was the last time that an idea, right, or a concept of what a public institution for familiarizing people with science or getting them to play with science came up, right? So that was, and that model has been sort of worked on, refined a little, and spruced up, when we got more glass, when we got, interactive screens, etc. So more technology has been added to it, more ideas have been added to the cookbook, but effectively it's been the same idea. Come, explore, right? In a defined kind of setup. So it's ranging from push a few buttons and learn about gravity to come, build a few things, or watch us do things, or here's a thing, right? So there's been a range of things that the Exploratorium model, and therefore the Science Center model in the world, follows. Science Gallery fundamentally sort of moves away from that idea. The sentence, again, that the Gallery Network has been using over the last 10 years is taking the or rather being at the vanguard of STEM to STEAM, right? Again, now these phrases, I mean, they're useful to indicate a range of things that I could explain in about 20 words, but STEM to STEAM, which is to put arts in the mix and find out what it can do, right? And here by arts, it's of course a space not only for creative, cultural arts or fine arts, but also the humanities, right? So this is a move away from the Science Center idea towards creating a public space for an engagement with science, which now moves beyond come and explore, come and understand, come and do something with science, right? Because in the previous model, so like with the museums, with the museum, of course, resided a certain history, a certain collection of, or recollection of how the scientific enterprise developed. With the science centers, it was, this is scientific knowledge, come and explore it, come learn some more. Let us throw some more science at you so that you enjoy it. The science gallery idea moves one step further, and I guess given that the previous idea was from the 1970s, it was about time to kind of move on and find a new way. It calls for an engagement which is open-ended, right? It doesn't call for an engagement where you come and you know what you're exploring. It calls for an engagement where let's see what we can do together. Let's ask questions about this or that thing. It's like the experiment that you saw in London where, with Brian Sutton, the crystallographer. I don't think he had ever wanted to crystallize spit before that, but it meant that after the experiment, it was fun, it was enjoyable, but he managed to tweak a few methods he was using, etc. And so it was an interesting sort of moment in the lab for him. It was an interesting project for both the artist and the scientist involved. Now it's a sort of fun example, but one can imagine that there would be a range of such things that could come out of an engagement when you throw people who have nothing to do with each other otherwise, given the way we've structured higher education systems, our research systems, our reward systems, etc. And so that's the sort of broad screen idea behind what Science Gallery does in terms of public engagement. And so it's beyond entertainment in a sense. So it's not sort of necessarily only snazzy things, But it's also beyond didactics, right? So you're not throwing more science at people or in a manner that they will understand, but you're asking them to come and explore it with you themselves. So it's about, to just sum it up, it's about exploring the process of knowledge making, trying to understand how scientific knowledge is produced, and therefore allowing people into the process itself, develop the critical and intellectual tools to understand what's going on, even in the abstract, not necessarily in the concrete. Possibly research collaboration between people who come from disparate disciplines and career backgrounds, and of long-term learning in informal settings, because this is a non-evaluatory setup. There's no grading for young people who participate, and there are no promotions for senior people who participate. That doesn't necessarily make it attractive though, right? I just sort of undersold the project already. But anyway, so what do? We, at Science Gallery Bengaluru, we will have once our building opens, so I should have already said, but I'll say it now, which is that we went into construction about a couple of months ago. We'll open our doors in 2021. Until then, we'll do one season a year. So our season is an exhibition plus a range of things, and these are the range of things we do. So we'll do up to 3 exhibitions a year of about 100 days each, educational programs that accompany the exhibitions. So master classes, workshops, etc. Events and live programs, research programs, fellowships, joint proposal developments, residencies, and then participating in collaborative networks. And I'll come to it in a second because this is right now in the abstract, but I just thought I'll share a list with you so that you understand the range of programs we do in a season. This is the space we have for public engagement. This is the pointy thing, right? Yes, of course, it's a pointy thing. So public engagement spaces, which are divided into 2 parts, engagement and public labs. This is the distinctive thing to Science Gallery Bengaluru. None of our other gallery network labs have, none of our network galleries have that. And that's because they are located on university campuses. We are located elsewhere, so which has in a sense congealed us into a different kind of institution, serving the same mandate but with a different assembly of facilities and provisions. So what we have, there it is. So I'll explain the engagement spaces first. We have an activity area for our visitors. In fact, that's the very first thing they will see when they enter the space, where we'll hopefully leave everything from rubber bands to potatoes and whatever. And so most of it will be come and explore and do things yourself. We'll also have hours when there'll be people who will be holding workshops and sort of supporting more deeper engagement with. So this is for the general visitor, remember that, yeah? We'll have more supported workshop as well. Exhibition galleries, a reading room, and among the 2 ideas that we borrow from the Wellcome Trust galleries in London, you can call it a resource area. It's not a library, but it does have books, and it has replications of historical objects which people can sort of hopefully, so the historical objects that people can touch and play with. This is something we would like to have there, and 2/3 of the reading room will be a stable sort of assembly through time, but 1/3 of it will be recurated to suit to every exhibition. So our general visitor who sees the exhibition can go into the reading area or into the resource room or the reading room, as we might call it, to find out more about what's on display, right? So if they so desire, there's that space for them to go to. We also have a black box theater, which is sort of a blank space for any kind of performance, including experiments in kinetics, if people want to do that. We have a gift shop and all of that, which, cafe, rooftop cafe, outdoor cafe. I have no idea if this has already been discussed, but the importance of actually meeting in informal settings and how most interesting conversations, but also most important decisions are often taken over coffee, and hopefully good coffee. So we have a strange target age group, right? We have the 15 to 25 age group, which is, as I like to say, and there are some people in this room who've heard me say this before, so please forgive me, but I have to say it. This is the most ridiculous age group to be targeting, right? Because they fall in this mad bracket. Half of them are below the age of consent, half of them are above the age of consent, half of them are below the age of drinking and above the age of drinking, below age of driving, which means we can't have a brewery on site, we can't serve liquid lubricants of any kind, and etc., right? So it's a difficult age group to kind of be programming for. So that's why we stick to coffee, right? And sort of many other things. So I think those are important provisions. And in addition, we have a community area over which we would like to have very little control. So we would like this to become the area for meetups, for people to kind of, so the sort of totally nerdy, nutty sci-fi readers group, or those people who play with circuit boards in their backyard kind of people. So we are hoping that this community area will become a place that the visitors will curate for themselves, right? So we'll give them plug points and whatnot. And of course, coffee, as I mentioned. So this is our public engagement space. In addition, we have public lab spaces, and the public lab spaces are equipped at sort of basic, but for the postgraduate level. So given the target age group, as I already mentioned, we have a wet lab, which also has a tissue culture and microscopy room. We have a workshop for wood, metal, plastic, and tabletop glass work. We have a theory lab, and here's the second idea that we borrow from the Wellcome Galleries in London, is the hub, right? Where multidisciplinary groups of people come together over a finite period of time, which could be anything between 1 to 3 years, and they work together. And that space is given to them to produce their conversation, their research, their exhibits, whatever it might be, right? So there's no definition of what their outputs might be, but we are giving sort of what we would like to give is a space where that collaboration can happen. So I think what I hope is becoming apparent is that while the mandate is to showcase collaboration for the network galleries, for us, I think it was imperative in Bangalore to create a space that delivered collaboration itself, because there is so little avenue, space, opportunity for collaboration across these kinds of career boundaries, that delivering that collaboration became our priority, right? And that has shaped these spaces. We have a new media lab, where we are hoping, again, kind of ridiculous things to happen. And then we have a food lab, which is attached to the main cafeteria, which hopefully will become the place to explore the food cycle. So anything from the University of Agricultural Sciences people and their seed experiments, CFTRI and their food project for the space program, molecular gastronomy, what have you. I hope it's also becoming very clear that I'm actually building or supporting the building of a playground, where I would like to play, right? And I'm counting on the support of everyone who supports this project to be supporting the mad activities that we are carrying out there. And then we have a very small portion of our gallery dedicated to residencies, where at any given point of time we are hoping to have scholars, artists, or scientists in residence who are working on a project or delivering a master class or giving a lecture or etc. So that's our provision in order to be able to deliver a deep long-term engagement program. So just to sum up what I just told you, so for the public engagement, the general visitor, we have these things. The other thing we will also do is, in addition to the things that I've already spoken about, is the program partnerships in the city and beyond. And what we mean, for example, is that while we are a small-ish place, it doesn't mean that we cannot reach out to others. So for example, we are trying to develop a program with the Bangalore Metro Rail Corporation to plan, say, Saturday lessons, right? Like Saturday fun lessons for 3 hours or 4 hours at metro stations, right? And for this, we are also working with partners on this in the city. The conversations are too preliminary, but not too preliminary. The conversations are preliminary and too early to tell how this will develop, but we've started putting the concept note for that in place already. The public laboratory, I've already spoken about. What's our method? So again, I'll briefly kind of tell you our exhibitions are based on an open call. In fact, our first open call just closed at 5 o'clock today. It's for an exhibition season on water. And is the returns to those open calls that are curated into a season, curated together into a season. Our first season is called Submerge. It's about water, and we are working on a partnership with the Smithsonian Institution to deliver that exhibition later this year. All going well, it'll open on December 15. The other distinctive thing about the gallery is that we have mediators. So in the process of the making of our season, which is an exhibition, bunch of masterclasses, workshops, etc., we involve young people in the target age group, and they then become the people who open the conversations with the people at the exhibition. So they are not tour guides in any formal sense. They don't explain anything, but they are people who initiate conversations. For those of who are at all interested, in fact, the network has a video on their YouTube, on our YouTube, what's it called? Playlist. The things I have to learn. On what our mediators do. So this is again distinctive to the network. We also have a research engagement advisory group, a Leonardo group, and the Leonardo group is a bunch of people with whom we talk to all the time in order to identify good topics that we can explore, collaborations that we can build, etc. And then young leaders who are essentially mentors to the younger part of the target age group. So this is the exhibition that will, all going well, open in December. Another thing that we are working on together with the National Center for Biological Sciences and the International Center for Theoretical Sciences is a dream of establishing a science festival for Bangalore, but for the country. Effectively, we have a national ambition with the festival. We've started working on it. All going well, again, it will open probably in the next 8 to 12 months. We are working on 5 themes for it. It will be a largish, 70,000 square feet area, open to the public, programmed for, that will be a much more general visitor program. So it's not for our target age group, but also for small people as well. And we are thinking of it as a cross between a literary festival and a Kochi Biennale or an art biennale kind of thing, where it's artistic, but it's about hands-on experiments that will be in the 5 thematic areas, and then there'll be a central tent for discussion and panels and films, etc. The idea is to contribute and to bring up the level of public debate on science in India, which actually at this moment it happens very well in pockets, but it's not happening at the general level, and so the idea is to open that door to see, where and how we can create a much, how should I put it? So if the gallery's motto is to contribute to bringing about a change in approach to science, then the Bangalore Science Habba is, by the way, festival in Kannada. The BASH motto is to bring about or to contribute to bringing about a change in the perception of science in society. So that's the goal we are working on, and so this is one of the key things that the gallery will be working on going forward. I am reaching the end of things. Another project that we launch later this year is called Recollect India. This is about connecting back to Free India's first generation of scientists, engineers, and lab technicians in order to capture the experience and learning of that generation for the young. So there is hardly any intergenerational conversation because of several reasons. Hierarchy, lack of access, etc. So we're trying to bring about that kind of an intergenerational conversation where the young and the not so young are able to talk to people who set up India's early institutions, who set up research programs, who built equipment, who did a range of things that today we take for granted, right? And what did it mean to do all of that? What did it mean to do science? What did it mean to decide research agendas at a point of time when there wasn't a large community, for example, right? And so to create an access to that memory, but also create access to that experience, this is another thing that we'll launch later this year. How to get involved. This is what my colleagues in London have put up. I'll explain that briefly. So most research grants currently in the UK, but also elsewhere, have a public engagement component, which most researchers do not have a way to define, shape, have access to. Also, there are hardly any avenues to actually do something with it, right? I mean, it's a problem on a lesser scale in the UK, but it's a problem, I mean, it's a pretty difficult problem to address here, I think, at the moment. So what my colleagues at Science Gallery London do is that they support, and because they have one university to provide services to, they support the writing of the public engagement part of research applications. So this is to some extent also that for applications for the NSF, there are sort of service units in American universities that help them to do that. So this is the kind of service that Science Gallery London and now Dublin provide to the researchers on campus, right? So they help write they not only help write the public engagement part of the application, but they also help deliver it, right? And that means, in many ways, it is a wonderful situation for the researchers because they're able to connect into an existing community that is able to help the interpretation of their work, bring in people who have interest and stake in their research into a dialogue and conversation with them. And so in a sense, open doors to a conversation that's otherwise not happening, right? And so this is something that we would like to develop also at Science Gallery Bengaluru, where we are able to talk to people who wish to develop a public engagement component to their research. And what we in India, I think, otherwise are very good at, and I'm going to be probably murdered after this, but matchmaking in that sense. So I mean, London's done that, so I shouldn't be so alarmed at saying it. But basically bring people together for a conversation, which otherwise, as I said, is not only not happening, but there are no avenues to have that conversation. And so, and then we are hoping that this research will lead to our exhibitions, our events program, lead to the making of maybe documentary films, lead to the making of many other things that are right now not being engaged with from just within the science community, right? And again, I mean, this is not sort of how should I put it? It's not that it's not happening at all. There are certain places where it is still happening. So we do see some of it happening, for example, at NCBS. We do see some of it happening at ICTS. But it's not the norm. And I think we would like to help make that a norm and make that possible. And this is what the architect's rendering of our absolutely fabulous building looks like. Do not say anything otherwise. Thanks for listening. Oh my God.
I guess you forgot to mention where it will be physically.
Wait, I can't hear you.
You forgot to mention where it will be physically located in Bengaluru.
Oh, I forgot to mention where it's physically located in Bangalore. Oh yeah, because I started with the assumption that people are coming from everywhere other than Bangalore. See how I can escape. We are located we are a 6-minute drive from the Indian Institute of Science towards the airport. So just 5 minutes after Mekri Circle. If you know HMT Bhavan on Bellary Road, and if you know CBI, then we are between the two on the opposite side of the road, a part of the Indian Veterinary Research Institute campus. Yes.
Jahnavi, 2 questions. You've presumably talked to 15 to 25-year-olds to understand what they would like to engage.
Yes.
Okay, great. The second is about the last thing you talked about, public engagement components and grants.
Yeah.
I am not aware of any granting agency in India except for India Alliance that gives that option. So are you advocating at a higher level for Indian government funding agencies to include public engagement components in the grants? Because unless that happens at a scale, it may not be sustainable.
Yeah. So that is not, so thank you for saying that. There is no active intervention on our part at this moment of that kind. So one thing is, of course, you do, but the other thing is also the various partnership grants, right? Like the various European research councils, etc., that come together and have partnerships with India, for example. So those grants also have these components. So the ones from So these grants have these components. So it's not sustainable in the sense that this is not the model. This is not neither our revenue model nor our sustainability model. This is something we would like to do in order to get researchers to have a buy-in into having this conversation with us, right? The way to deliver collaboration primarily is through these spaces. So by having both structured and less structured programs for people to come and use these spaces is the way we will deliver collaboration. So whereas this will be an additional kind of both service, but also a participation in the larger ecosystem, so to speak. But thanks for that tip. I think that's the first one, which is to seek some kind of at least a dialogue on the possibility of widening that opportunity.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. It was quite interesting. I think I was just wondering whether you would like to add a community outreach component to this.
Community outreach?
Yes.
Yeah, so our work with the Bangalore Metro, for example, would be one such program.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we will do is that we don't have collections, we will not have collections. So in a sense, at the end of each of our exhibition seasons, whatever we produce will be given away to schools, to tier 2 city science centers. So they'll be, of course, packaged properly. You can't just sort of send something without whatever. So those are the ways in which we will seek community engagement, and also in the hub, for example, right, or the theory lab / hub, where the research groups themselves will be founded upon an engagement with people who have a stake in the topic under consideration. So it will be embedded into the program itself, right? So it's not about, in a sense, taking what we know to somebody else. It's about actually building that engagement already into the way we shape the collaborations.
Yeah, because I was thinking that having it in Bangalore, you're making it largely urban-based, but we have a large rural setting also.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of institutions that do go out, especially on the medical front, that go out into the community. I mean, we are required to do it.
Yeah.
So engaging with medical colleges and institutions
to
get to the community may be a good idea, because one of the important concepts that we have in community health and other things is also to create awareness and public engagement in the communities that we work in.
Yeah.
So it may be something that you would want to consider.
Absolutely. I mean, the gallery the gallery is realized only through partnerships, right? We don't have expertise in the sense, an in-house expertise, like say NCBS, right, or ISC. I mean, they have their own scholars and expertise. The gallery is a platform, right? So in a sense, the partnerships and collaborations is what gives it its content. And therefore, it's those partnerships that will shape the sort of relay of engagement. Sorry, say that again?
I'm suggesting that you do collaborate with medical institutions, also that go out into the community, and that also offer research work.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Jahnavi. This is Purnima Menon. I work on issues of nutrition and think a lot about how to communicate this to other people. So I have a couple of different questions for you. One, what's the current, I'm really interested in the financing model for stuff like this. So do you, what's the current financing model for this kind of work? Who are your big donors, et cetera? The second is, what's been sort of the extent of your outreach to the art world and to the very large, I have several friends in the art world, and so I know there's huge philanthropy around art and the India Art Fair, and just the art movement itself in India has really picked up, and there's a lot of people who are very interested in supporting that. So I was wondering if you can speak a little bit about, the kinds of linkages that you may have, because you clearly have some very strong science partnerships to the academic institutions, but what does the nature of your partnerships look like with the art world? So those are two questions.
Okay. Remind me of the first one again? My
The
funding. Yes,
model.
of course. So at the moment, we are primarily funded by the government of Karnataka. And for program funding going forward, we will look for funding from elsewhere, program funding from elsewhere. It also comes from partners that we have both nationally and internationally, and those. So, for example, we received some, but not entire funding for the summer season from the United States Consulate because of the partnership with the Smithsonian, for example. We've recently had conversations with the Max Planck Institutes in Germany for a potential program in the next couple of years, etc. So, so that's the how should I call it? The bricks and mortar funds are primarily coming from the government of Karnataka, and the rest of it is sort of a combination of the two. The partnership with the art, we have Shrishti School of Art, Design and Technology as one of as the third partner, right? So it's very much accounted for, and not accounted for, very much taken into account while even establishing the institution itself. And what is the extent of our outreach? So just to give you a timeline, I started in my job a year and a half ago. Our building went into construction about 2 months ago. We are opening doors in 2021. So programming and programming related conversations and those partnerships, we will start on sort of more seriously this summer. That said, I mean, we've had preliminary conversations with the India Foundation for the Arts for partnering on grants, grant allocations. We did a workshop at the Student Biennale at Kochi, March was it, or something like that. I mean, India Art Fair is a very different kind of beast. I mean, it's more a gallery fest where people buy art. That's not the kind of stuff we would engage in. And also, yeah, so I mean, you know, it's very much on the anvil, and we have, I think, the right kind of partners to be able to bring that in. I mean, just like the Indian science community, the Indian art community is global. It's a matter of sort of finding a convergence and a mode and moment for conversation, and then, you know, and again, you know, I mean, things are happening. It's not like things aren't happening, right? I mean, there is the art science lab house at Shrishti, for example, and a couple of other things that are happening, you know, in the country, which hopefully we'll tie up with and you know, strengthen those efforts in order to take the effort further. Yeah. Yes.
Lovely talk. As a Bengalurian, I can't wait for it to begin. We have been waiting for the Science Hub for a while. I wanted to know if there's a plan not only to look at our history, but also to look at local problems. For example,
sorry, what did you say?
Is there a plan also to educate public and kids especially about our local problems, for example, flash floods? So I was looking at the design of your building to see do you have plans for rainwater harvesting, educating that group of kids that you're targeting to let them know what our future is going to be like. So not just look back at our history, but also look forward.
We don't do art history per se.
No, history of science, right? Of our country.
Yeah.
So is there also a way forward to look at how we can save our city to begin with, think about flash floods?
Yeah, so couple of things to that. Yeah, I mean, you know, it'll again, so remember, the program is dynamic, right? Like, so it'll change, but yes, the fundamental principles, of course, are there. And we work very closely with NCBS, for example, who leads on the Bangalore Sustainability Forum, right? Which is doing a significant amount of work for precisely this kind of conversation to happen and to take this message to the community, to research groups, to the young people. And so yes, so we will be contributing to that. Yes, we do have the kind of, the building does have the kind of things you mentioned. Yes, the solar panels, yes, the rainwater harvesting, yes, the STP, yes, So yes, I mean, we are aware of it. So we did away with a lot of glass because, you know, it's not the right thing to have, which is why we have a sort of brick cladded building now, etc. So we are aware of it, and it should, so we will have a plastic free campus. The cafe and the food lab being next to each other will mean that we'll probably serve, you know, thoughtful food, etc., all of that. So yes, those are all sort of, but right now, I mean, you know, my claims are purely in the realm of, as they say in Hindi, khayali pulao, because, you know, 2021, and every day is a new new world for me, right? So yes, but those ideas do inform where the gallery is going to go. Yeah. Oh no.
Jahnavi, just a quick question. You know, one of the defining features of the other galleries is the translation of science and art, or translation of science with art.
Yeah.
And I think, I thought the Science Gallery in Bangalore is trying to do something different. I wonder whether you'd like to speak to that.
Yeah. So like I said, where art and science collide is the tagline that all our galleries use, and it's exactly as you said, science through art, science with art, scientists and artists collaborating, coming together as a commentary, etc. Now, what is important for Science Gallery Bengaluru, and this was the opportunity that was opened up by the fact that we are an independent gallery, is in fact our ability to provide access to facilities, thinking, ideas for networking, for engagement, to a section of the young who otherwise don't have access to institutions like this, right? So the young who are, for example, the young who are not going to easily walk into, say, an NCBS campus or an IISc campus or a IC, or even reach ICTS campus, or any comparable campus in the city. For them, this should be an accessible place to understand and explore what goes into the making of science, but also participate in it, right? And that's why the nature of the building. So I often call it the fishbowl building now to myself. The architects don't like my description of that. But what I mean by fishbowl is that the exhibition galleries are interspersed with the workshop, with the lab, with the media lab, with the food lab, etc. So at any given point of time, you're going to be able to see what's happening inside there. So while entry to the lab spaces is more screened, obviously you can't have 50 people walk into those kinds of spaces, but they can see what's happening. And so in a sense, through sight generate an aspiration, but also a desire, also a knowledge that this is a messy, noisy, smelly, greasy process. And so that kind of affinity and aspiration, but also not just sort of purely by sight. And I'm going to patent this phrase, that's a joke, where I think we have way too much of what I call the darshan mode of engaging with science, where you go on an open day. And I'm not undervaluing the importance of these events at all. I mean, they're extremely important. I mean, and the way people flock to it, we know there's a hunger for it, right? But there is still that element of you go, you see, you kind of feel wonder, and you leave. The difference here is going to be that it's about coming and doing. Even for the general visitor, the first thing they hit when they come inside the building is the activity space. And so it's about actually doing, it's about participating. It's not about come, see, leave. It's about come, do, come, then listen to it. Some of it is structured, some of it is, some of those activities are less structured, but it's really about do, participate, and the audience, and what we want to ensure. For example, and this is again like I said, it's very early because we are just starting out our programming, but we want to, for example, keep the 10 to 12 slot in the morning for more structured interactions with the 15 to 17, 15 to 18 age group, where they can come in and, sort of just get familiarized and used to the idea that you can walk into a lab and want to do something, not to kind of deliver an experiment to which you've got a sheet and you know the answer, and if you don't do it, you can copy your lab mate's notebook and you kind of get on with things. Or you can't touch expensive equipment because, it's too expensive for anybody to touch, that kind of thing, right? And so it's really about learning by doing, understanding by exploring, and sort of open the process of knowledge making. I think that's the key phrase for me. And I see again, another phrase that I use for myself, which I don't think we'll ever use in sort of, in publicly about the gallery, but this is a community of academics, so we can use it, is that the work of the gallery for me is about scripting science back into culture, in a sense, because I think there's a great sort of schism of understanding, there's a great schism of conversation between the two, where there needn't be. Science is a social enterprise. There should be many, many ways of having interfaces with that conversation. So I think in that sense, what Science Gallery Bengaluru is able to deliver in a slightly better way than other galleries at the moment are doing is because we have facilities that are provisioned for this purpose only, right? And so in a sense, our ability to reach the public through something like a public laboratory is going to, I think, define our work. Again, something academic. I mean, as Sarah mentioned at the start, I'm a historian of science by training. My starting point for thinking about how to interpret and deliver the Science Gallery mandate for Bangalore was in fact the Indian Association for Cultivation of Science, which is a late 19th century institution in Calcutta. And I'll tell you why it was my starting point. There was someone like C.V. Raman who was in the Indian Accounts Service, and there was a place for him to go in the evening to pursue a passion of his. There are no public places like that or public spaces like that available to anybody today, right? And so what does a space like that in the 21st century look like? I mean, this is an attempt to deliver that kind of space. Now, what the outcomes will be, who knows, right? I mean, time will tell. If I knew, and as a historian, I almost sort of, have a difficulty, taking any claim to future seriously. But I think this is an attempt to create that kind of a public space, which is for the serious, passionate person of that particular, in that particular age group more seriously, but even others who can come and do things, who can come and explore, who can talk to people who are passionate about science. And that's why I think what is important to remember for me and for others is also that this is a place for science, right? An engagement with science. It doesn't matter whether you're a historian like me, or you're an artist, or what, it is about coming and exploring the craziness of the physical, natural, cultural world around yourselves in a single space, right? So that's kind of more broadly my understanding of why we might be slightly different in the network. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Jahnavi. That was a really interesting talk and a window into the Science Gallery. Look forward to seeing it evolve and also hopefully contribute to the gallery.
Thank you.
So thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you for your attention.